There are places on Earth that shouldn't exist. Places where the rules break down, where maps give up, where even sunlight refuses to go. This is the story of one such place. A concrete monolith that rose 14 stories into the Hong Kong sky and descended into absolute darkness below. A place where 33,000 people lived in a space the size of a city block, where the population density was so extreme that if the entire planet lived this way, everyone on Earth could fit inside half of Los Angeles. It had no government, no building codes, no laws except the ones made by those who lived inside. It was called Kowloon Walled City, but the people who lived there had another name for it: Hak Nam, the City of Darkness. And for 40 years, it was the most densely populated place that has ever existed. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to 1898. The British Empire had just leased the new territories of Hong Kong from China for 99 years. But there was a problem. A small Qing Dynasty military fort sat in the middle of the lease zone, Kowloon Walled City. The treaty said the Chinese could keep it, a tiny piece of China surrounded by British Hong Kong. For decades, it didn't matter. The fort was abandoned, a crumbling relic. But after World War II, something unexpected happened. Refugees fleeing the Chinese Civil War began squatting in the ruins, thousands of them. They built shacks, then houses, then they started building upward. The British couldn't evict them. It was technically Chinese soil. The Chinese government didn't want to intervene. It would legitimize British control. So neither side did anything. And in that legal void, the walled city grew. By the 1950s, it was already unrecognizable. By the 1980s, it had become something else entirely. A living, breathing organism. A glitch in the matrix of empire. An ungoverned space in one of the most controlled cities on Earth. If you approached Kowloon Walled City from the outside, the first thing you'd notice is that it didn't look like a neighborhood. It looked like a single building, 14 stories of concrete and rust and tangled wires, packed so tightly that you couldn't see where one structure ended and another began. Over 300 buildings crammed into 2.6 hectares. No gaps, no streets, no space between. Because there were no streets, the streets of Kowloon were corridors, narrow passageways carved through the interior, some less than a meter wide. You walked through the buildings, not between them. There were no architects, no permits, no plans. People just built. When they ran out of room horizontally, they built vertically. When they couldn't build higher, they built into their neighbor's wall. Floors didn't line up. Staircases led to nowhere. Rooms had no windows. The entire city was a three-dimensional labyrinth, and because buildings shared walls and foundations, the structural load was collective. If one building fell, it could take down 10 others. So people reinforced. Wooden beams, metal rods, improvised supports wedged between floors. The walled city wasn't designed to stand. It chose to stand. Every day was a vote of confidence in physics. But the strangest thing wasn't the buildings, it was the wires. Imagine a sky made of cables, thousands of them, electrical wires, phone lines, illegal TV antennas, all tangled into a dense web overhead. There were no utility poles inside the walled city, no infrastructure, so residents just tapped into the grid outside. They ran wires from rooftop to rooftop, building to building, floor to floor. If you looked up, you couldn't see the sky, just cables, a ceiling of copper and rubber. Electricians became the most important people in the city. They were the only ones who understood the map of the wires, the only ones who could trace a blackout back to its source without getting electrocuted. And because nothing was regulated, nothing was safe. Wires sparked. Fires were common, but people adapted. They learned which cables to avoid, which corners smelled like burning plastic, which floors flooded when it rained. The walled city had its own logic. You just had to learn it. Now here's the thing about living in a place where buildings touch on all sides. Sunlight can't get in. If you lived on the ground floor of Kowloon Walled City, you existed in permanent darkness. The sun never reached you, not a single ray. The buildings above blocked everything, so people used fluorescent lights all day, all night. The hum became the heartbeat of the lower levels, but even artificial light couldn't reach everywhere. There were corners that stayed black, stairwells that descended into voids, hallways where you walked by memory, not sight. And the darkness had an ecosystem. Mold grew on the walls, thick, black, perpetual. The air was wet. Water dripped from pipes that no one could find. It pooled in corners mixed with garbage and became something else. A smell you could taste. Rats were everywhere. Not timid rats. Kowloon rats. Big. Unafraid. They owned the dark spaces. They moved through the walls like they had their own city within the city. And then there were the roaches. People said they were the size of your thumb, that you'd hear them before you saw them, that they moved in waves. But the people who lived there didn't talk about the darkness like it was terrifying. They talked about it like it was normal. Because if you grew up in Kowloon, you didn't know anything else. Sunlight was the myth. Darkness was home. But Kowloon wasn't just darkness and chaos. It was also a place where 33,000 people lived, where children played, where families cooked dinner, where old men sat in doorways and smoked and watched the corridors like they were streets. And it was a place where power filled the vacuum, where the triads moved in, where the law was whatever the strongest said it was, but also where something unexpected happened. A community formed. A society built itself in the cracks. In the 1950s, when the walled city was still finding its shape, a power vacuum opened. No police, no government, no one to say what was legal and what wasn't. So the triads moved in. The Sun Yi-On became the de facto rulers of Kowloon walled city. They didn't govern in the traditional sense. There were no offices, no paperwork, no bureaucracy, but everyone knew who was in charge. If you wanted to open a business, you paid them. If you had a dispute, you went to them. If you broke their rules, you disappeared into the corridors. And the triads brought their businesses with them. Opium dens opened in the basements, brothels on the middle floors, gambling halls hidden behind false walls, dog meat restaurants that operated in the open because no health inspector would ever come here. This was the era when Kowloon earned its darkest reputation. But here's the thing. The triads also kept a kind of order. They prevented robberies, settled disputes, made sure the place didn't eat itself alive. In the absence of law, they were the law. And then, in the 1970s, something changed. The Hong Kong police launched a massive crackdown. Triad leaders were arrested. Operations were raided. By the 1980s, the triads' grip had loosened. And when they left, something unexpected happened. The community took over. But Kowloon wasn't just vice and darkness. It was also a place where people worked. Because the walled city existed outside Hong Kong's regulations, you didn't need licenses to do business. No permits, no inspections, no taxes. So factories opened, hundreds of them, on the ground floors, in basements, in repurposed apartments. People made things: fish balls, noodles, dumplings, textiles, plastic toys, metal parts. The entire city hummed with production. You could walk through a corridor and smell a noodle factory on your left, a garment workshop on your right, and a metalworking shop above you. 14-hour days. No safety regulations. Machines crammed into rooms so small, you had to step over them to walk, but it was work. And work meant survival. And then there were the dentists. Kowloon walled city became famous across Hong Kong for its unlicensed dental clinics. Dozens of them. Some were run by people who had trained as dentists in mainland China, but couldn't get licensed in British Hong Kong. Others were just optimistic. But here's the thing. They were cheap. A tooth extraction in downtown Hong Kong could cost a week's wages. In Kowloon, a day's. So people came from all over Hong Kong. They walked into the walled city, found a dentist in a third-floor apartment with a repurposed barber's chair and a drill connected to a car battery, and got their teeth fixed. Some of those dentists were excellent. Some were not. But in a place where regulations didn't exist, reputation was everything. The good ones thrived. The bad ones didn't get repeat customers. And despite everything, the darkness, the triads, the rats, the mold, something remarkable happened in Kowloon walled city. A community formed. People didn't just survive here, they lived here. They raised children, celebrated weddings, mourned deaths, cooked meals in tiny kitchens and shared them with neighbors. Because when you live that close to people, when your wall is their wall, when you hear every conversation, every argument, every laugh, you either help each other or you collapse. So they helped. Old women watched each other's children. Men pulled money to fix a leaking pipe that affected 3 floors. Shop owners gave food to families who couldn't afford it, knowing they'd get it back when times were better. The corridors became social spaces. People sat in doorways, talked, smoked, played mahjong. Children ran through the maze like it was a playground, navigating by instinct. And then there was the roof, the only place in the walled city where you could see the sky. People went up there to escape, to breathe air that wasn't thick with moisture and mold, to feel the sun, if they were lucky, to hang laundry, to sit and think. The roofs were connected. You could walk across the entire city without ever going back inside. It was a second world above the maze, quieter, open. Some people kept gardens up there, tiny plots of vegetables in makeshift planters, life insisting on itself even in concrete. And at night, the roofs became something else, a place to see the lights of Hong Kong glittering in the distance, a reminder that the world outside still existed. By the late 1980s, the Hong Kong government had made a decision. Kowloon Walled City had to go. Not because of the triads, they were mostly gone, not because of crime. It was actually safer than parts of downtown Hong Kong, but because it was an embarrassment, a chaotic anomaly in a city trying to modernize, a place that didn't fit on any urban planning map. In 1987, the government announced the demolition. Residents protested, but the decision was final. The clearance began in 1991. Families were given compensation, some fair, some not. They moved out slowly, reluctantly, taking their lives piece by piece. By 1993, Kowloon Walled City was empty, and then the bulldozers came. It took months to tear down what had taken decades to build. The buildings didn't fall easily. The reinforcements, the improvised supports, the shared walls, they resisted, but eventually it was gone. Today, the site is a park, Kowloon Walled City Park, peaceful, clean, designed. There are a few preserved artifacts, stone plaques, a model of what it looked like, informational signs, but you can't feel it. You can't smell the mold or hear the fluorescent hum or see the wire sky. You can't walk the corridors that were streets. The densest place on Earth is now empty space. Kowloon Walled City existed for 40 years as a glitch in the system, a place where all the rules broke down and people built something anyway. It was dark, it was chaotic, it was dangerous, but it was also home. And the people who lived there, who raised families in the maze, who worked in unlicensed factories, who looked up at a sky made of wires and called it normal, they built a life in a place that shouldn't have existed. They proved that people can adapt to almost anything. That community forms even in the cracks. That darkness, when it's all you know, becomes a kind of light. Kowloon Walled City is gone, but its memory remains. A reminder of what happens when the world forgets a place, when the rules don't apply, when people are left to make their own. They built a city in the darkness, and for 40 years, it stood, watching the past, so we can understand the present, and together, we keep history resurrected. I'll see you in the next era.